Hi. Okay, so the next thing to do is, of course, the mesh. So the first thing to do would be to quickly discuss the mesh tool, which is here on the toolbox. So if I double click the mesh tool, let's look at the mesh default settings. Okay, the mesh is very similar to the slab, okay, but the mesh is able to be contoured by certain spot levels or what's called ridge points in Archicad. Okay, if you can just appreciate that a mesh, when it is first drawn, it looks flat like a slab. Okay, and then once you embed spot levels and embed, say, for example, contour lines, and embed levels at the boundary corners of the mesh, you can begin to raise those points by a specific height, okay, which then gives the impression that the site is contoured. Okay, what we're effectively doing is creating the topographic surface according to the information from the survey. So when we first set up the mesh, what we're going to do is set a nominal height or a nominal thickness to the mesh. Okay, when we set the nominal thickness, I normally like to set it at 1 meter. Okay, then we looking at these icons here. These icons indicate the graphic depiction of what the mesh would look like if you were to cut a section through it. Okay, I like this one the best because it appears the most strong, in the sense that when you cut through the mesh, you will have a defined hatching to show that this is ground level. Okay, this one is just going to show the ground. This option here is just going to show a ground line, okay, based on the contours of the top surface of the mesh. And this one's going to give an indicative mesh thickness by just drawing the skirtings. But I do like this one the best because it gives a nice hatch to it. Okay. Now in the floor plan, and before we finish in this section of the geometry and positioning, just let's talk about the home story. When we first open the Glebe template, the template is set up in such a way where there is only one story, which is site level, or AHD. Okay, and if you recall, AHD stands for Australian Height Datum, which is the surveyor's zero. Okay, as the project progresses, we will include or insert new stories that will represent the stories of the building. Okay, for example, there will be a ground floor story, a first floor story, a second floor story, and a roof story. Okay, but for this stage, you build the mesh, or you build the site on a story that is typically labeled AHD. Okay, this box here represents the RL level to Project Zero, and Project Zero is in many cases, if not all cases, taken to be the same as AHD, okay, which is zero, surveyor zero. Okay, we've talked in class briefly what Project Zero is in relation to vertical space or vertical height, and so if you can take Project Zero to be at the XYZ plane at 0, okay, we'll discuss this further in class because it makes sense to be able to show you how Project Zero or AHD relates to the story settings. Okay, so for the time being, what the geometry and positioning information should be, it should be 1000 as the thickness, okay, and the base of the mesh height will be at 0 in vertical space. Okay, then the graphic symbol when it's cut in section will be this one, and then the home story is site level AHD. Okay, with the floor, I'll close this section up so we can now move on to the floor plan and section. With the floor plan and section, I'll just point out the most important items here for the time being, which is the cut surface should be earth. Okay, this is what gives us that indication, which is this. Okay, so this is depicted by a particular hatch, which is determined as this, the fill type. If you wanted to change the fill type can be changed by clicking on the patch and then going to one of the fills, either a solid fill or a vectorial fill or a symbol fill, and changing the fill to the appropriate one for your project. Okay, but in this case I'll escape because I don't want to change the fill. And then the other thing is that we don't at this stage want a cover fill. A cover fill is a hatching that occurs in plan. Okay, generally we only allocate a hatch to indicate the cut surface in, say for example, when you cut your section. We don't normally indicate a cover fill for the mesh. All right, the cut surfaces, typically it's such as when you have a concrete pad footing, it might be the concrete in situ cut fill. Say for example, oops, if I go to let's see, concrete, there should be, generally there's a concrete in situ one, but the concrete is typically, and I'm sure you're all familiar with it, those circles and triangles to indicate the concrete. Okay, generally in ArchiCAD we're fairly restrained with cover fills. You may consider a cover fill, for example, for pine decking, where you'd have horizontal lines to indicate the planks, or perhaps for roof sheeting, where you'd have a cover fill for the roof sheeting. But generally, or tiles in this case, if you have tiles for, say, a patio. But in this case it makes no sense to have a cover fill for the mesh, so we'll just untick it. And then for the model is for colors that will be shown in the 3D model. Okay, so the most important part is to show that it is ground, so that we have a grass for the top surface. If you notice that the grey shaded part indicates that it's for the top material. For these two, for the skirt material, the side material, and the bottom material, we can keep it either grey, or we could go to perhaps another type of browny, earthy type colour. Okay, but for the time being I'll leave it as grey. Okay, for the listing and labelling, just delete the tile floor. Obviously the mesh has been used to create a different has been used to create a contoured volume for a different project, okay, which has just inherited some of these characteristics, okay, from the template. And then the layer that the mesh is going to be allocated to should be site existing layer. Okay, but I'll just click on here to show you that if you wanted to allocate it to a different layer, then when you click here you can then check another layer. Say for example, if it should be going on to dimensions, then you would click dimensions, and there it would then it would mean that this mesh would be allocated to dimensions. Okay, but that's not quite correct. So what we'll do is put it back to site existing here. Okay, so just check those settings are similar to your settings and then press OK. And then the next thing to do is to, of course, draw the mesh. And if you remember from class, in every circumstance, when you select something from the toolbox and you double click the toolbox element and then fill in the parameters, after you press OK, it's important to come up to the information box and determine A, what is the geometry method that you will be drawing with, and if it's correct, then you can begin to draw. But generally, if it's not correct, such as if it were defaulting to a square, then you would need to change it here. Okay, and then B, you need to just quickly glance over here to check that all the parameters are right. Generally they will be if you've gone into the mesh default settings and set them up here. Okay, so the correct geometry drawing mode is polygonal, and what you should do is begin by snapping, okay, and just going to go here. Begin by snapping to the intersection of this grid. Then come over here and snap to here. Notice how I'm waiting until the pen goes black. Okay. And then come over here. Now wait till the pen goes black. Okay. And then the pen goes black. Notice how I'm zooming out quite quickly and then zooming in, and you've noticed when I zoom in, it zooms and centers. Okay, so never be worried about being too much of a zooming in and a zooming outer type person, because it is the fastest way actually to get around your project and to draft quickly. Okay, so I'm just coming to the end of this polygonal shape, and I'm about to close the shape. So notice again, must wait until the pencil is black, and then I will click here, and if I hang on a second, I'll be back.